Caitlin Doughty, it's nice to see you. Your book is Smoke Gets in Your Eyes and Other Lessons from the Crematory. Welcome, first of all.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you in Miami at the Miami Book Fair. There's so much energy out there. You know, I want to start with your book. You have a very unusual view of death, or at least unusual for American standards. Can you tell us a little bit about how that all started for you?
Yeah, my view is that I think we should be much more intimate with the process of not only dying, but with the dead bodies. So thinking about back 100 years ago, the family took care of the dead body. It was in the home, you washed it, you shrouded it, you were there, and then you took it to the cemetery. But now we have professionals who come in and take it away immediately and do who knows what behind the scenes, and we don't really get to see it as, or the person as they actually were. And so my contention is that we need to bring the dead body back into rituals and into the family.
So you're a mortician yourself.
I am a mortician myself.
Yeah, and
yes.
so how have people responded to that? I mean, we have different customs. In every country they're different. But how has people in your world responded to your views about how we should look at death?
Well, not everybody who's in the mortuary or death industry with me loves it all that much, because the things that the industry is built on, embalming and the taking of the body away for professionals to handle it, that's how they make money. And it's hard for them to accept me saying, oh, the family can take care of it themselves. But the general population seems to be really, really responding to it, and it's filling a need for something that they want in their own lives and their own deaths.
You have a really unusual sort of approach to it. You have a blog, and there's some cheery pictures of you at the crematorium with the cremation machine sort of poking at something unnamed in there, and it's obviously could be unsettling to a lot of people, but that's your whole idea. Your whole idea is to kind of disrupt to some degree the funeral business, which you're a part of.
Yeah, well, it's a tiny line between being over the top and disrespectful, but then also trying to be funny, because I think humor really brings people in. Because if I just had a website and a book that said, people die, it's very sad, and it's like the falling leaf, we have a lot of that already. What we don't have is someone being very frank, very open, and even humorous about what goes on after death.
And you have had this fascination with death for a long time, your whole life. Can you tell us where that started?
Well, I witnessed a traumatic death when I was younger, and ever since then I was terrified of death when I was young. And some of what I do now, working in the death industry, doing this advocacy, is to try and fix that young girl a little bit, which a lot of us, I mean, we all kind of are trying to fix our childhoods, right? But for me, it's that fear of death, and saying, as an 8-year-old, why was I so terrified? Why did I live in a culture that didn't support me at all?
And you've written, as you've sort of come out and found your way into this world, it seems very natural to me as I read your book and thinking about, yes, this is exactly where you belong. You write, though, about the idea of death denial, something that you've never had a problem with. It's sort of been a beautiful experience to you. But in America especially, why American? Why do we have such a trouble with the idea of death?
A couple things. First of all, we're optimists, right? So don't let any bad, we say that grief is pathologized. We say don't grieve for too long. Even though that was your husband, you get about 2 weeks before you have to be over it and looking for a new husband or moving on. And we're an optimist to the point that we're not allowing ourselves to fully face death and fully face grief. And then the other thing is the professionalization of death. The medical industry took the dying people out of the home, and the funeral industry took the dead person out of the home. So we just don't see dying or death anymore. So it's easy to deny it when we only see it on television.
You mentioned the business of dying, the business of funerals. What is your stance on embalming?
Embalming is not my favorite thing. I think that everybody should absolutely be able to pick what they want and makes them comfortable with death. Embalming is a chemical preservation of the corpse, and in most cases it's not necessary. It's billed as for sanitation and for public health. That's not really what it's for. It's for preserving the body so the funeral director can put makeup on it, put the suit on it, and show it to the family. And in a way, I think that we should be not trying to so desperately preserve ourselves. I think that we should have the couple of days after death and then let our atoms go back into the universe and let ourselves decompose and be more comfortable with the very natural process of death.
Cremation seems to be growing as an option for a lot of people, especially in our country. Are you seeing that? Is that something that you're seeing more and more people choosing cremation over burial?
Oh yeah, it's nearing 50%. And where I work in Los Angeles, in California, it's even higher because it's a big city and it's California, which is the West Coast states tend to be a little higher on the cremation than the East Coast or Southern states, certainly. But yeah, it's really, really growing. And in some ways I'm for that, but in other ways I think there needs to be more ritual around cremation. We need to show up and see the body. And in some cases you can have witness cremations where you watch the body be loaded in and push the button to start it and feel like you're part of this, not just sending the body off for somebody else to cremate.
Yeah, you write about that. Is that something that you see very often? I mean, people coming in about, to be a part of the cremation. I mean, I think for most people that I've talked to, they just want to be there after it's all done. They don't want to participate in that. And in fact, it's all very sort of on the other side of the curtain.
Right. There's a lot of memorial services, and memorial services are you show up and there's the picture and there's the urn. So you know that the person died, but there's not really, the evidence is only this gilded urn, and that's all you have. And I think that it would be beneficial for us to have more tangible evidence that the person died, because there can be a lot of complicated grief when somebody dies hypothetically. So when you just call the hospital, you hear that somebody dies over the phone, they call the hospital, have somebody come pick them up, cremate them, you get the ashes back, so you never actually see the person, you just get the ashes. And that works for some people, but a lot of people don't even know at this point that there are options beyond that, that there are options to be much more involved and much more engaged with the process.
Yeah, I was involved once in a family ceremony with the ashes, and it was the first time I was younger, and it was the first time that and we were spreading the ashes, and the first time I actually, looked at them and put something into them and spread them, and it was the feeling I've never forgotten. And I just wonder if you see in other countries people with a more comfort, with a higher comfort level with the ashes and with the ceremony afterwards.
I would say pretty much every country has a higher comfort level than we do at this point. The Western countries especially are very bad with the hiding everything away. In Japan, for instance, they have a ritual where after the body is pulled out from the cremation machine, the bones are all laid out and they come with chopsticks to pick up the bones and put it in the urn. And they start with the feet and go up to the head so the person can walk upright into the next world.
Yeah.
And the family's there, they're with the bones, they see the real bones, and even cremated remains in this country are a little iffy because we grind the bones to make the cremated remains, so it's just powder, there's nothing that looks human at all. It's like the person has been erased.
So this is like a startup kind of overturning a big company that's been doing something for a long time. You're a disruptive force in the funeral industry. How are other funeral directors responding to you? You're in the same business.
Yeah, there are a lot of especially younger funeral directors who are very much, we're on the same team and we're allies, and they want to give families and modern people exactly what they want with funerals, including being much more involved. And then there are some people who are older or just more part of the status quo, I guess you could say, and they want to embalm, they want to put them in the casket, they have 3 caskets to choose from, and then you put them in the ground and that's it. And that's how you do it. And that's not going to work forever. People are saying, no, we want more, we want to be more in control, we want the feeling of being a part of it.
Okay. You as a disruptor and as somebody who's doing things, a big part of it is this book. And as you go out, you've had this amazing reaction to the book, because people in some cases, a morbid fascination. In other cases, you're sort of turning people on to a new idea that maybe they've never thought of before. As you're out there and as you're talking to people, what are you seeing in terms of people's openness to change? And is it a young versus an older thing, or where are you seeing most of the change happening?
There are more young people, but it's not young versus old. There's definitely a lot of older people who are environmentalists or just have a certain viewpoint that says, I don't want my body to be chemically preserved, or I don't know that I want all the natural gases in cremation. What I want is just to be, for example, buried naturally, just a hole in the ground, my body in it, there we go. So the things that I say, even if they're not for everyone, because not everybody wants a home funeral. Not everybody is ready to bring the corpse into their home. They're not ready for that, or they're not ready for a natural burial. But what they are ready for is to hear the options. Because when you hear all the options, you can feel much more in control about the decision you're making. You don't feel like you're just being blindly led along to some inevitable death conclusion or form of care when you die.
When you talk about it, it's so obvious that this excites you and that you're interested in it. There's a passion here. You have a blog where that all comes through to the Order of the Good Death, which is like a place where there are videos, there's fun. I mean, you make me laugh. You have a great sense of humor about it. Tell me about that blog and how that's grown over the years, and that is an outlet for you to sort of express your opinions about this.
Yeah, I started the Order of the Good Death about 4 years ago now. And the idea was to bring together all sorts of different people, death industry professionals, academics, artists, people who were trying to get death back into public conversation. And one thing that I started with that is a web series called Ask a Mortician. And it's very kitschy and very ridiculous and just me like, hey guys, do you have a question about Viking funerals or where the ashes, you know, how the ashes are ground after cremation or whatever it is. And the idea is to make the blog and the web series a very welcoming place to say, hey, your questions aren't deviant or morbid or wrong. It's perfectly acceptable to have these questions. We're all gonna die. This is not some niche thing. We're all going there. And having questions about what's gonna happen to your body, what's gonna happen to you, what's gonna happen to your family are completely natural, and trying to hold them in maybe isn't the healthiest thing.
Yeah, I mean, there's parts of the blog, when I read them at first, I was like, oh, and then you read them and I just kind of read more. Like there's what's left behind in the crematorium or in the cremation machine, for instance, after a cremation. It was fascinating to see like that there's pieces of metal and other things that are inside your body that you never think of. You never think about that hip replacement or whatever else happened that, you know, that you find obviously after you're all finished.
Yeah, after a cremation, so what most people don't know is that after a cremation, it's not just the ashes. It's not the, you know, the beautiful white fluffy ashes we think of. It's big chunks of bone and also metal, hip implants, knee implants, parts of the casket if there was a casket that was cremated. And we have a big magnet that we go in and we remove the metal and then we put it in a machine called the cremulator and it whirs up, and that's what is the sort of fluffy, non-human ashes that we think of.
The cremulator.
The cremulator.
Your voice on your all your videos is one of the highlights for me. I mean, because you add a little bit of that macabre. I feel like I'm watching a little bit of like Morticia Adams or something. But I think that as you do that, I think it does bring in. It tells the storytelling side of it, your natural passion, your humor. Helps people cross that threshold into sort of rethinking how they're gonna die.
Yeah, because again, if you're saying like, today we're gonna talk about death, the fact that we're all gonna die, you know, that someone's gonna turn off that right away. But if you have that kind of camp to it, or the Morticia Adams, or the, you know, the slapstick sort of things, I think that people are like, okay, well, I don't know how I feel about death, but maybe I'll stick around for another minute, and then you just try and get them hooked.
One of the things I think about all the time is I jog through a cemetery, or as I'm driving and I see a cemetery and I see these really expansive cemeteries. It's like, do we run out of places to bury people, and is that why cremation is happening, or is it just a shift in thinking?
Well, not necessarily. Yes and no. I think that a lot of people feel that way. It's nice that you jog through a cemetery, by the way. Good for you. That's a little memento mori jaunt to the cemetery. On one hand, you know, for cities, we don't really have the room so much for cemeteries anymore. But, you know, you could not build that 14th Chipotle and have some more room for cemeteries. So if you consider, if we valued cemeteries more, we would find room for them. And if you've flown over the country, you know we have room for cemeteries. But cremation, I think, has grown up because there was really a movement to say, oh, it's too expensive funerals and we want something simple and elegant. And we've gotten to a point where that's true. We have very inexpensive, very cheap cremations available, which is wonderful and that should be available, but we don't have any connection to them anymore. We just send them off to the death body, the death depot, and cremate them, and that's it.
Well, I've loved this book. It's really made me think. It sort of fits my style of thinking about things. I'm still sort of scared of the whole idea, and yet you make it so comfortable for anyone to walk in and to think about it and to open the conversation. Has been very successful in that regard. You're Caitlin Doughty. The book is Smoke Gets in Your Eyes and Other Lessons from the Crematorium, and I'm so thankful to have you here.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was
nice
great.
to meet you.